Everyone, welcome to the London Buddhist Centre. My name is Akasha Mitra, and lovely to welcome you here this evening to our virtual shrine room. So we're in the shrine room of the London Buddhist Centre. We've got this beautiful shrine behind us, and this evening we're carrying on our series on the life and teachings of Padmasambhava, and this week is called Breaking Free. Welcome. And this evening we've got Syria Gupta with us, who I'm going to hand over to in a couple of minutes. But I'm just going to welcome us all as we arrive. So do announce yourselves in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from, maybe how you're doing, if you feel like doing that as well. And it'd be lovely to hear from you. So who have we got arriving, Britta?
Yes, we have Kalpana Singh from West Norwood.
Great. Hello, Kalpana. Kalpana's a regular tuner inner. Yeah.
And there is also Adriana.
Lovely. Great. Welcome, Adriana. Yeah.
There's Paul Wannet from Brighton.
Lovely. Welcome, Paul.
Sam Kitson from Rochester in Kent.
Great. Lovely. Welcome, Sam.
And then there's Nina from New York.
Hey, Nina from New York. Welcome.
And there's, I think, King Marcus from London.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be hearing about another king this evening, so that's very, very appropriate. Yeah. So welcome. Yeah. Good.
So we have 33 people. There's also Robert Rowe from Southern.
Lovely. Welcome, Robert. Yeah.
We have people from Trieste.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Eva from Slovenia.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Welcome all the way from Slovenia. Welcome, Eva. Great, just up the road, yeah.
And then there's also Frank Jeffrey from up the road. He's from Columbia Road.
Okay, lovely, beautiful. Great, so welcome everyone. People will be arriving for a few more minutes. I'll just say a little bit about what we're doing this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Syria Gupta in a couple of minutes, and then she's going to start the evening off with a period of meditation. And then I'm going to be giving a talk. And that will take us up to a tea break at about 5 to 8. And then we'll have a tea break for about 10 minutes or so. There'll be a little bit more talk. And then, as is our custom, we'll have some time for questions. So we'll have a good half an hour or so for questions later on. We've had some very interesting questions this week. It's a lovely thing to hear people's questions, I think. And I felt like it's really opened up the talks and hearing people's reflections and people's questions. So if you have got questions, do think about what those are. Yeah. Great. So who else is arriving?
So we have Alan James from Whitechapel.
Lovely.
Yeah. There is Maggie also from Suffolk.
Mm-hmm. Great. Welcome, Maggie.
Yeah, we have Martin Wallace from West London.
Lovely.
David from Camberwell.
Okay.
And Kate from the wonderfully stormy West Sussex coast.
Wonderfully stormy West Sussex. Okay. It has gone very, very autumnal, hasn't it, the last couple of days? So, yeah, I can imagine that. So, welcome to everyone. Really nice, I always think, to have a sense this part of the evening of sort of people arriving virtually. And maybe we can sort of imagine a sense of just everyone that's joining us. It's a virtual Sangha, but it is still a Sangha, a spiritual community. So it's really nice to just bring each other to mind and wish each other well. If you were actually at the London Buddhist Centre, people would be sat around saying hello and drinking tea and so on. So just, it's nice to bring each other to mind. Yeah. So we might just give it a couple more minutes, I think. Probably still a couple of people arriving. Yeah. I have to admit, I always sort of run out of things to say at this point. I feel a bit like a sort of a radio DJ or a slightly nervous kind of party host that's waiting for people to turn up, So I just thought I'd name that for you all. There you are. Good. Okay. Great. So there's 60 of us. That's lovely. Excellent. I hope you've been enjoying this week. It's been really, really nice. I've been catching some of the talks in the evening. And I know that there's been meditation in the morning as well. I think Syria Gupta has been leading meditation. and I think Diabhadra might have been leading meditation as well. And there's been qigong and yoga and meditation. And so, yeah, I hope you've been enjoying this week so far. I think it's a fantastic theme. I'm so glad that we're talking about Padmasambhava and his teachings. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we will hand over to Syria Gupta now. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you very much, Akasha Mitra, for welcoming us into the space. And also thank you to Britta and Kieran, who's from Dublin, who are our hosts, technical hosts this evening as well. Welcome to you all. It's really good to be here, to be back, exploring these themes of you. And as Akasha Mitra said, I've been doing meditations in the morning, which I've really been enjoying. And yeah, the talks in the evening have been really great, sort of really exploring the themes. And we've touched on quite a lot of themes of different spiritual values, inspired by the guru, the 8th century guru, Padmasambhava. So Monday, we were looking at, how to break free. That's our theme, breaking free from Monday was superficiality, living on the surface. And then Tuesday, I spoke about breaking free from the demons, from inner and outer obstacles. How do we do that? And then yesterday was breaking free from limitations. And tonight, very happy to be hearing Akasha Mitra speak about breaking free from conventions. So what are conventions? Why do we want to break free from conventions? And if they are limiting in some way, I'm sure we'll hear about that, then how do we break free from conventions? I'm really intrigued actually with what Akasha Mitra is going to speak about. And I think he's a very good person to speak about breaking free from conventions. And we'll probably hear a bit about that as well, I'm hoping too. But before all of that, we will get ourselves ready for meditation, where we can just really arrive and open to the experience we're having now and the experience that's going to unfold this evening. So get yourselves in a comfortable position. Invite you to close your eyes. I'll lead us in a body scan to begin with. And then we will do the period of the mindfulness of breathing, a sort of short period of mindfulness. And this morning, as I was guiding people in practice, I was talking about responding with appreciative eyes, with an appreciative way of approaching the practice. So appreciating the fact that we right now, no matter what's going on in the world or in our lives, we have the opportunity to meditate. Appreciating the fact that we have bodies that work enough for us to meditate, and our breath, so this vital force that's flowing through us, that helps us both concentrate, relax, and discover more of the meaning of things. So really a lot of things we can appreciate, no matter how your meditation is this evening. Okay, so that's something you can drop in from time to time as we sit. So getting ready. And, just to begin with, wherever you are right now, whatever your support is, whether it's a chair or cushion or bed, allowing your weight to really drop into the support. Or allowing yourself to relax into the support. So the lower half of your body. Relaxing into the chair, cushions. Feeling the ground beneath you. Feeling the earth beneath you. knowing that you're supported by the ground, by the earth, feeling the support. And you can do that by just allowing the muscles in your legs, pelvis, hips, buttocks to relax, to soften. There's no need to hold on right now. We can keep letting go. Connecting with the upper half of our body from the base of our spine, all the way up to our back, to our head that's poised on our shoulders. Feeling yourself upright, alert, awake, and also relaxing, opening up, softening. So that might be your shoulders. You might find your shoulders just dropping a little bit. If you find there's tension there, you can imagine breathing in or actually breathe in to your shoulders and imagine and feel that breath flowing through, loosening the shoulders, flowing down the arms, into the hands, out through the fingers. Connecting with the crown of your head, forehead, softening the face, eyes relaxing, mouth, jaw loosening. And noticing the breath, noticing the movements of the body the breath is making. So that's maybe your throat, your chest, abdomen, coming in and going back, expanding, contracting with the breath. Checking in. How are you at this moment in time? Getting a sense, the feeling tone, whether it's broadly pleasant, broadly unpleasant, or somewhere in between. Your whole body breathing. If you know the mindfulness of breathing, we'll do the first stage of the practice briefly. And the third stage, the first stage is where we count at the end of the out-breath. The third stage, we just drop the counting. appreciating the breath. Keeping on relaxing the body, loosening, softening any tensions. Noticing we are holding on and choosing to soften that area or let it go. And letting the counting go. Just breathing. Whole body breathing. Becoming absorbed in the breath, interested in the breath, appreciating the breath. Coming back when our mind drifts off. Appreciating that moment of awareness. Connecting with your body. Aware of the breath in the body. Aware of all these people with us. Also meditating, breathing, relaxing, becoming aware. More and more aware. more and more open to experience, to understanding experience. So drawing the practice to a close. Just bring in all the sounds around you. Be aware of that. Be aware of yourself and the environment you're in. Feel your feet on the ground. And appreciate your efforts to sit. To be open. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. So, thank you. And now we have Akasha Mitra, who's going to be talking to us about breaking free, and this time breaking free from convention. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you, Akasha Mitra. Yes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Syria Gupta. Thank you, and thanks for leading us in such a lovely meditation. Such a nice way to start the evening. Thank you. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Padmasambhava and an episode from his life. So we've been hearing about him all week, and you will probably by now have a sense of this kind of magical, mysterious character called Padmasambhava. He was responsible for taking the teachings of the Buddha from India to Tibet. And he's a kind of semi-mythical character. So we don't really know, but it's likely that he actually did exist. But over the centuries and over time, the stories from his life have been sort of turned into legend, basically. And they've been turned into these kind of mysterious episodes. And we're going to look at one of those this evening. Tonight, Padmasambhava is meeting the king of Tibet. So you may have heard earlier in the week that the king of Tibet invited Padmasambhava to Tibet from India to subdue the demons in Tibet. And now, finally, this evening, we get to the moment where Padmasambhava is actually going to meet the king of Tibet. So in your mind's eye, if you can build up this picture. So the picture is a very, very elaborate, very, very sort of intricate and fantastical one. Basically, the king is staying in a pleasure park. So what a pleasure park looked like in ancient Tibet, I'm not quite sure. But the king was staying in a pleasure park, and he was staying not just in a castle, but apparently it was a double castle. So the king was staying in a double castle, and he had not one queen, but two queens. So the king's staying in a pleasure park, which in a double castle with two queens. There's thousands and thousands of people there. And basically the king of Tibet sends his entire retinue, so, hundreds and hundreds of people to meet Padmasambhava. And they're all dressed in this incredibly elaborate clothing. It's very, very opulent. It speaks of power and money. Apparently there are dances going on. There's music going on. So, it's like something from, an incredible sort of film or an amazing scene, really. And this is the scene, basically, where Padmasambhava is meeting the king. So it's not just that he's meeting him face to face. There's this whole kind of scene around it, basically. And the moment comes where Padmasambhava comes face to face with the king. He comes face to face with the king. And of course, what do you do when you meet the king or you meet royalty? I haven't met royalty myself, but I have met something close. I'll tell you more about that later on. But yeah, so he meets the king, and of course, what do you have to do? You have to bow, don't you? You have to bow. If it's the queen today, you have to curtsy, apparently. I don't know what would happen if you didn't do that. You would probably get yourself into all sorts of trouble. But this is what's expected of Padmasambhava. And this is what the king expects of him. He's the king and he expects him to bow. So will he bow? Will he bow? This is the question. So we come to a bit of a cliffhanger already. And Padmasambhava says basically in this tale. So by the way, this is an episode from a book of tales called The Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava, which are incredible. They have all these amazing stories in them. And in the tale, Padmasambhava says, if yes, so if he will bow, if yes, the majesty of the doctrine will be slighted. So the majesty of the Buddha's teachings, of the doctrine, will be slighted. And I think it's really interesting that he uses that word majesty, because he's obviously about to meet the king, but he's talking about the majesty of the Dharma, of the Buddha's teachings, that actually that is the real majesty. So he says, if yes, the majesty of the doctrine will be slighted if he bows to him. If no, since he's king, he will be angered. So he knows that obviously the king is there. He's got all his courtiers around him. He's got all this finery and everything. He knows that the king will be angry if he doesn't bow. But he says, yet, however great he be, bow down I cannot. So he will not bow to the king. He cannot bow to the king. Not only will he not bow down to the king, he cannot bow down to the king. So why can he not bow down to the king? So it's not because he is being obstinate. It's not because he's being deliberately difficult. It's not because he's just being rebellious for its own sake. It's not because he doesn't like the king or even sort of respect the king on a certain level, but he can't bow down to the king. So why is that? So I think it's worth us thinking about, well, what are we doing when we bow? If you've been to the Buddhist Center, you'll have seen, and even, virtually on evenings, you'll have seen people bowing to the shrine. What are we actually doing when we bow to the shrine? Why do we bow? I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that we do. I'm a big fan of bowing, and I find it very difficult when people say that they find it strange that they can't bow. And I think what we're doing, it's like with our bodies, what we're literally doing is we're making ourselves lower in front of something that we think is greater. So when we bring ourselves down like this, we're bowing to something. Like with the shrine behind me, we've got this beautiful image of the Buddha there, and we spend a lot of time making it beautiful. We have candles, we have flowers, all of that. We're adorning it because as Buddhists, what we believe is that these are the highest things that you can have in your life. So the values of the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha, the Buddha, his teachings and the community around that are the highest things that we can have in our life. So that's why we bow to it, because we're bowing in deference to something that we believe is mysterious, it's beautiful, it's magical, and that's why we're bowing, and that's why we sort of bring ourselves low in front of the shrine. It's like we're paying our respect and we're paying homage. So Padmasambhava can't do that. He can't do that to the king because he is an enlightened being. So it's just convention, basically, bowing to the king. That's what it is, basically. And we're going to talk a bit more about this as the evening goes on. It's a convention that he would bow to the king. And Padmasambhava has no time for that. He's seen right through that, basically. What he represents is the culmination of ultimate wisdom, the culmination of the Buddhist path. And he's not going to bow to the king because he has no respect for him purely in terms of social convention. He may care for him, he'll be deeply compassionate towards him, but not only can he not respect him just as the king, but what he wants to do is actually wake the king up and get the king to see that all of this convention and all of this sort of opulence and all of this, ultimately, actually, it's meaningless compared with the true majesty, which is the majesty of the Dharma. So he can't possibly bow to him. But not only that, he doesn't only stop there. He goes a step further, and this shows how unconventional Padmasambhava really is. He goes a step further, and two things happen. So one thing is that he says this to the king. He says, "And you, king of barbarian Tibet, king of the country without virtue, uncouth men and ogres surround you. You rely upon famine's serfs, and neither joy nor good humor are yours. As for your queens, they are rakshas in human shape." So rakshas are like kind of demons or evil spirits. They are rakshas in human shape. Beautiful purple ghouls surround them. Sandalwood, turquoise, and gold adorn them, but they have no hearts and no minds. You are king, your lungs swell. Great is your power, your liver is well satisfied. Scepter in hand and haughty, you stand high, but I, sire, will not bow down before you. If I had time, I would read that out again, because I just think you can't really take that in first time, can you? Also, not only can you not take it in, but you can't quite take in the fact that Padmasambhava is saying that to the king. I mean, just think about the implications of that. Anyone else would be absolutely terrified to do that. But Padmasambhava is saying this to the king, and he's really, that could be seen as very, very provocative. Who knows whether he's going to have his head cut off, in the next few minutes. But he doesn't care about that. He's completely fearless. He's completely unconventional. And he just wants to tell the king how it is. And what he wants to do is wake the king up from his slumber, basically. So he says that, and then, even more than that, something else happens. Something else happens, which is absolutely amazing, which is that Padmasambhava points at the king, and this magical flame comes out at the end of Padmasambhava's finger. So it's like he's become this sort of, I would say human. I don't think it's completely accurate to describe him only as human. It's like he's become this superhuman flamethrower, basically. So he points at the king, and this flame comes out of the end of his finger. And it scorches the king's clothes, the king's robes, basically. So his robes get set on fire, and before you know it, the king is stood there in front of all his courtiers, in front of everyone, basically wearing burnt rags, wearing burnt cinders. So blimey, I mean, it's so great, this story, isn't it? What is going on there? What is going on there? This is amazing. So I think it's true to say that the king gets more than he bargained for. He's invited Padmasambhava to Tibet to sort of conquer these demons, but he gets way, way more than he bargains for. And I think this is the key to this episode. The king wants Padmasambhava to meet him, and he wants Padmasambhava to work with him, but he wants it to be on his terms, basically. He wants it on his terms. And what Padmasambhava represents is the Dharma, is the Buddhist teaching in extremis, basically, like brought to its ultimate conclusion, or in the highest sense. The king wants Padmasambhava to bow down to him, and that's just not possible. And he wants it on his terms. He wants Padmasambhava on his terms, and that's also not possible. And I think that's represented by the flame coming out of Padmasambhava's fingers. Basically, what Padmasambhava is saying to the king is, okay, if you want me in your life, it's on my terms, mate. You know, we don't do anything on your terms. Anywhere I turn up, it's going to be completely on my terms. And also what he wants to do is he wants to wake the king up, because the king is obviously enthralled to his position. So he's enthralled to power, he's enthralled to wealth, he's intoxicated by his power and his wealth and his position, basically. And Padmasambhava doesn't care about any of that. And he can see, you know, he's a fully enlightened being, and he can see that all of this is actually completely hollow. It's just a blind alley that the king is going down. And if the fact that the king is completely enthralled to that is going to hold him back. So the first thing he does is he sets fire to his clothes, which means that the king is stood there. And it's basically like Padmasambhava is saying to him, okay, where are your riches now? Where are your fancy clothes now? You know, he's completely naked in front of Padmasambhava. And if he's going to have Padmasambhava in his life, in a sense, he has to be completely naked. He can't bring any of that with him. He can't bring his riches with him. He can't bring his power with him. He has to bow down to Padmasambhava. He has to be naked, and he has to bow down to him. Yeah, so that's quite an episode, isn't it? So I guess the question is, what does that have to do with us? You know, so we might think, okay, well, that's nothing to do with us. You know, I'm nothing like the king. You know, I'm not living in a double castle. I'm not living in a pleasure park. You know, I'm not sort of coated in all this finery. I don't have this huge retinue. But I think the question for us to ask ourselves is, what are we enthralled to? What are we holding on to? And in the holding on to whatever we're holding on to, what is that doing for us and doing for our lives? And what implications does that have for our future? Because whether we realize it or not, we will be enthralled to certain things. I mean, I was thinking about this as I was putting this talk together, and I was thinking it's almost like we've got these central guiding things that we orientate our lives around. And you could call it almost like a myth. So, you know, the myth that we're looking at this evening is the myth of Padmasambhava meeting the king. But our lives will have their own guiding myth. And the interesting thing about that is often we don't even actually know it. So we may not even be conscious of that. We may not have made it conscious. We're often not even aware of what it is that's guiding our life. Often because it's the water that we swim in, basically. It's the things that we absorb as we grow up. It's the values that we absorb from our parents or our friends, from the society around us. Often we're orientating ourselves around particular things or guiding images or values, and we don't even know what those are. We may know what they are, but often we don't even know what they are. And yeah, we haven't even made them conscious a lot of the time. So what I'd like you all to think about is what and how and where. Yeah, so what, how, where. So what are we doing or not doing? First of all, what's the guiding image that's guiding us? Yeah, what are we orientating our lives around? What is that, or what are those things? And secondly, what are we doing or not doing in order to serve or uphold that myth, or move towards that myth or that thing that we want to have, or that way that we want our life to be? So that's the what. And then how is that playing out in our life? So what is that turning our life into? What is our life because of that? So whatever we're enthralled to, and whatever those values are or those things are, that will be playing out in our life somehow. So how is that playing out in our life? And then the last thing, where is that taking us? Where is that taking us? In other words, what sort of person is that turning us into now, in the medium term, and in the long term, in the future? Where is that taking us? Where are we going to end up because of that? I think an interesting way to think about that is there's a thing, probably some of you have heard of this, there's a thing that I always like to do, which is called the rocking horse test, which is basically thinking about when you're a really old person and you look back on your life, what do you actually want to see? Like if you were an older person looking back on your life, how do you want it to be? And what can you do in your life in order to bring that about? What can you do in your life now in order to bring that about? It's very, very striking. The work that I used to do was running discussion groups and communication groups with older people. I used to do that for many years. It's such lovely work. And that was one of the questions that we used to ask people at the start of these groups, people in the 70s, 80s, 90s, was when you look back on your life, what are you most proud of? And it's really, really interesting hearing people talking about that. And as a young-ish man at the time, I felt it was a real privilege to be in the position of hearing people talking about their lives and sometimes talking about their regrets and saying, I really wish I'd done more of this, or it was only when I got to a certain age that I realized that actually X didn't matter or Y didn't matter. And actually hearing that as a young man was a really valuable life lesson. It means then that I could think, you know, as a young man then about the rest of my life. So that's the rocking horse test. So I think the danger, I think first of all, I just want to say that often what we're trying to do with that, what we're trying to orientate ourselves towards is an attempt to fulfill this lack that we have. You know, we have this existential lack. So there's a Buddhist word called Dukkha, and some of you will have heard of that. It basically means this sense of incompleteness, this sense that things aren't quite right, that we could make things better by doing such and such. That's what we're trying to do, but the danger is that often we go about that in the wrong way, and we look to satisfy that existential need in things that are never actually going to be able to satisfy it. So, for example, our career, are we actually spending our life doing work that we don't want because, I don't know, somebody's laughing in front of me because I think they can relate to this point, okay? Are we spending our life doing work that we don't want because we think that we need to have a certain amount of money? Or even worse, are we doing a certain kind of work because that's the work that our parents wanted us to do? You know, I remember once meeting somebody and him talking about being a doctor. It's a very noble profession, you know, nothing wrong with that. But he said he didn't really enjoy it. He said the main thing was that he was making his parents happy. And the best thing about being a doctor was that when somebody asked you what you did, you say, I'm a doctor. And that was basically it. He said he didn't really enjoy it, you know. So, you know, is it your career? Is it you're looking for a partner because you really feel like you need to have a partner because you can't be happy on your own? Whatever it is, I'm not saying that any of those things are good or bad, but we have to actually work out if that is the thing that is really serving us, that is taking us towards growth, becoming a bigger, becoming a kinder, becoming a more compassionate person, and something that is actually serving something beyond ourselves. So what is that myth? So I'm just going to tell you a story from my own life, which is about somebody, and I'm not going to say who it is because I don't think that would be very fair. It would be a bit uncharitable. But when I was a young man, there was somebody that I really, really looked up to. So he was the guitarist in a band that I absolutely loved. This is going back a long way. You know, this is like in the 90s, basically. So I was in my teens, 16, 17, 18. And there was a guitarist in this band. I'm not going to say who the band were. It's a bit pointless because you probably never heard of them anyway. They were pretty small in the 90s. You know, you go to their gigs and there'd be like 400, 500 people there. They weren't very big. But that was part of it, you know, like not everybody knew about them. They're really, really cool. And this guy was a guitarist in the band, and I worshipped him. I absolutely idolized him. He was so cool. Like, he was beautiful. He was really, really skinny. He had this gorgeous long hair. He used to wear these amazing kind of clothes, you know, like leather jacket and tight jeans and all of that sort of thing. And he just looked so cool. And he was in this amazing, cool band, and he was the guitarist. And, you know, I thought this guy was the absolute bee's knees when I was sort of 16, 17. Yeah, and I just thought he was amazing, and you know, really, really sort of looked up to him. And then this band reformed. So I guess he'd have been in his early 20s at the time, back in the 90s. And this band reformed recently, and I went to see them a couple of years ago, and it was a really, really interesting experience. So I went to see them. It's like a couple of years ago, and they played a few reunion gigs, you know, very small, about 150, 200 people there. And it was the original lineup. So he was there. And God, I really got a shock when I saw this guy like 30 years on. It was really, really painful, actually. Like, he looked like almost exactly the same, but 30 years older. Like, he was wearing pretty much the same clothes, like pulling the same moves, and looked like he'd been following that kind of rock and roll myth for 30 years, like, you know, probably drinking a lot, probably taking a lot of drugs. And he just looked like a shadow of the guy that I knew in, you know, when I was in my teens, and he was in his early 20s. And I think you can probably wear that look when you're in your early 20s, and it really doesn't look good by the time you get into your early 50s, which is what he would be now. And I thought that was really, really painful. And I kind of felt for him, actually. Like, he'd been this guy with an amazing amount of energy in his early 20s, and really sort of commanded the space. And I think both he and I at that time kind of brought into a myth, a central myth, which is, like, broadly speaking, the sort of, you know, the rock and roll myth, which at the time, you know, I was into bands like, maybe you haven't heard of these bands, but the MC5, the Stooges, the Velvet Underground, this sort of thing. And it was very much like live fast, die young, drugs, alcohol, all of that sort of thing. But that myth doesn't work. Basically, what I saw when I saw this guy again is that actually, with that, if you follow that, what you do is you just get smaller and smaller and smaller, basically. And I thought it was particularly poignant because the aspiration originally was for something really, really pure. So Syria Gupta talked about this a little bit the other evening, which I thought was very, very interesting, is getting underneath what it is that we're actually doing. So what is it that we're actually really looking for when we do these kind of things? So for myself, as a teenager, I grew up in a small town in the north of England, and I was looking for excitement. I was looking for transcendence. I was really, really bored living in a small town in the north of England. And I always had a sense that there was much, much more to life. I always had that sense from my early teens. But the only thing that was really available to me at the time was that kind of excitement, basically. So I thought that's the way to go. You know, that kind of rock and roll myth. I was looking for transcendence. I was looking to become someone bigger than I was at that time. But that was where I looked for it, basically. And that was what this guy represented to me. And that was what this band represented to me. But that myth doesn't work. As I said, I think what I saw there is that you just get smaller and smaller and smaller, sort of following that myth, basically. You're looking for something, you're looking for self-transcendence, but it doesn't work. And often that's what happens, is we're looking for something in a particular myth or in a set of beliefs or a set of values. But actually, in doing the thing that we're doing in order to break free, we actually end up imprisoning ourselves more and more. And we actually end up in a cage that is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we can only start to break free, from whatever these conventions are that are holding us back. And they'll be different for each of us. We can only start to break free if we actually recognize what is going on in the first place. So we need to become conscious of what it is that we're actually doing with our lives and the values, or is it just values, or it's sort of, it kind of values or idols or things that even that we believe to be true, that will be guiding us. So we need to become conscious of what those are. And then we need to look at them, and we need to see, actually, is that really working for us? Is that actually taking us in the direction that we want to go? And if it's working for us now, is it going to be working for us in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? So I think we need to stop. It's almost like the metaphor that came to my mind is, it's like we've got this machine that's broken and we're trying to make it work. We're trying to make something work that is just not going to work, basically. We're trying to satisfy this deep existential longing that we have. And we're not going to be able to do that by just trying to satisfy it with things on that same level, basically. We're not going to satisfy a deep existential longing through, partner or career or money or everything that the king represents, basically. That's what the king represents. Actually, what we need to do is change our whole relationship to that. And that's what Padmasambhava represents. He represents total transformation. And that transformation is of changing our relationship with those things, hence setting fire to the king's clothes. So if we have this feeling, like, things work for a little while, and then we just seem to keep coming up against a brick wall. Oh, we're in this place again where, I got the new job and that worked for a while. But now, the novelty's worn off and I'm in this place again of difficulty and disappointment. If the relationship worked for a while and now it's not working, if the thing that I keep expecting to ultimately satisfy leaves me in this place of disappointment, then that's because the myth that we're putting our faith in, the myth that we're putting our trust in, is not big enough to contain that aspiration, basically. The only thing that can contain that is what Padmasambhava represents, which is a myth that will just keep growing and growing and growing. It's transcendental, it's beyond us. So it will just keep growing, which means that if we place our heart upon it, if we place our trust in it, it won't let us down, basically, because it's big enough, not just to contain us, but to contain us the more we grow and the more we go beyond ourselves. So in order to do that, we need to look at what we're doing, make those values conscious. And it may not be that we have to let those things go in our lives. So maybe I'll say a little bit more about that after the break. But we need to harness the energy behind those things and put that into something bigger, into something that's bigger than ourselves and bigger than all of us. And that's what Padmasambhava represents. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to pause there and we'll take a tea break for 10 minutes or so. And have a think during the tea break if you have any questions about what we've said or anything that we've been talking about this week. And we'll be able to answer those in the second half. And then we'll come back at about 8:05. Yeah, so we'll take a 10-minute tea break. Okay. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so welcome back, everyone. So I just want to start with a correction, which is that apparently I was talking about the rocking horse test when I actually meant to talk about the rocking chair test. And the three of us were having a bit of a giggle here about lots of people in their 90s being on rocking horses, and that might have been a bit strange. So yeah, it's the rocking chair test, not the rocking horse test. So sorry about that. And thanks somebody for correcting me in the chat. Yeah. So I just want to carry on with what I was saying, and then I'm going to tell you a little story, which is a bit of a corrective to the one that I told you, or just a slightly different angle. So first of all, I just want to summarize a little bit by saying, I was talking about this thing before the break about what we're orientating ourselves around. So what are we orientating our lives around? What are we putting at the center of our lives? What are the values that we're putting at the center of our lives? Because, as I said before the break, what we're often trying to do is we're trying to get to a place of satisfaction or happiness or security by looking to certain things to fulfill us. And it's not going to work. It's sort of doomed to failure, basically. And what we need to do is we need to orientate ourselves around higher values, around a myth that can actually not only contain us, but that contain whatever future self we become. And it's bigger than us, and it's bigger than all of us. And in Buddhism, that's what we mean some of you might have heard the phrase going for refuge. So that's what we mean when we say going for refuge. It means that we're placing our heart upon, we're putting at the center of our life the teachings of the Buddha and the example of the Buddha as a human being, as an enlightened being, the fact that enlightenment is possible for us as human beings, that ever and ever greater levels of wisdom are possible for us as human beings through the Buddha's teaching. And we do that in a community with other people. So the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. So when we put that at the center of our lives, that's what we call going for refuge. And I think going for that's what's meant by going for refuge. But what it also means is that we stop looking more and more, and this is a process, it's a process, it doesn't happen overnight, but it also means that we stop looking to things in our life that can't satisfy us. We stop looking to them, hoping that they will satisfy us. And I think that's really important. And the other thing that I want to say about that is, paradoxically, what I've found, my experience is, that actually what that means is that those things actually become much, much more satisfying, that life becomes way, way, way more enjoyable because we're not choking those things in our lives. We're not having unrealistic expectations, basically. So, a good example would be with a partner, or a job or something like that. I mean, speaking for myself, I'm in a long-term relationship. I live with my partner. But I don't expect that my partner is going to fulfill all of my needs or fulfill this sort of deep existential longing that I have. I don't have that expectation of her. And actually then that makes things a lot easier because I'm not placing unrealistic demands on that person. And, you could say the same of your job or your family or whatever it is. It's a lovely, lovely paradox that we put our heart on something higher. We have something higher at the heart of our lives, and that takes the pressure off everything else. And then paradoxically, actually makes life much, much more enjoyable. We can really savor those things in our lives without having unrealistic expectations on them. And that's what Padmasambhava represents. He represents those higher values, that transformation that we're moving towards. And then I just want to tell you a little story, which is, it's a bit of a yarn, really. I mean, it's sort of relevant to this evening, but I kind of wanted to tell another story about somebody else that I really looked up to in my life, which has a slightly happier ending than the episode that I told you about before the tea break. And I thought about this because I thought, oh, well, Padmasambhava is meeting the king. Could I imagine that? You know, I haven't met royalty myself, but I have met somebody that for me is royalty, basically. So I have met Nile Rodgers. So some of you might have heard of Nile Rodgers, slightly more famous musician that I also idolized, you know, from when I was a teenager, basically. Absolutely, how cool can you get? You know, was a Black Panther when he was in his teens, you know, beautiful looking guy, you know, really funky clothes, incredible guitarist. And he's the guitarist and the main singer in a band called Chic that was like, you know, one of my favorite bands that I think are amazing. I mean, he also was a producer. He worked with David Bowie, Diana Ross, In Excess, Duran Duran, Madonna. You know, he would always take artists when they were floundering in their career and make them really, really successful again. That's what he did with all sorts of people. So he, to me, is you know, is a bit like a king, basically. Like, I can't really imagine anyone that I could sort of idolize more. And a few years ago, I've got a friend called Tim who is he designs music software, and he's also a musician himself. So he's a member of our Buddhist community, and he's very, very successful. And he basically said to me this one day, he was doing a TED conference, and he said, look, Nile Rodgers is going to be at this TED conference. Do you want to come down and meet him? So I was a bit like, okay, you know, thinking it wouldn't happen. And so, yeah, just thinking about, you know, sort of meeting the king. When I met him, basically, I was nothing like Padmasambhava, and no flames came out of the end of my finger. I actually basically couldn't speak. So I was so nervous. My partner always jokes about this. She said she's never, ever seen me so kind of like, I was almost like, went a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit strange because I was so nervous. I was basically dribbling. And when I met him, I was sort of more or less just could string like a few words together, like, I love you, Mr. Rodgers. And he was really, really lovely. That was the funny thing about it. He was like really, really chatty and wanted to kind of get to know me a little bit and that sort of thing, but I just couldn't do it. I was so nervous. But what was lovely for me about that, and in a way why it's a counterbalance to that earlier story, is he is somebody who also kind of subscribed to that rock and roll myth when he was younger, and it all came crashing down for him in the 80s. I recommend reading his biography. It's called Le Freak. And basically, like, money, success, you know, all of this sort of stuff, and very, very big kind of drug habit. And that all came crashing down in the 80s. And he's really, really changed his life, basically. He's been completely clean and sober for many, many, many years. And he now runs this foundation called the We Are Family Foundation, which basically helps underprivileged kids by training them to become sort of future leaders. And yeah, I thought that was just a nice little story to tell. Partly it's just quite funny hearing about me being able to not string two words together. But also just thought it's a nice counterbalance for before, that we can actually see what we're doing and change our lives and put our lives in the service of something higher that's, you know, that's higher and is about more than us and about more than ourselves. So, yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll invite Syria Gupta to come back in now. Can we hear?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Akash Mitra?
So we're just having a little bit of trouble hearing you at the moment,
Okay.
Syria Gupta. Just be a second.
Syria Gupta.
Can you speak, Syria Gupta?
Yeah, I'm here.
Ah, great. Okay, lovely.
Shall I carry on?
Yes, please do.
I'm live. Am I good? Okay, so I'm smiling away here, because I've very much enjoyed your stories, Akasha Mitra. It's very good actually that you told those two contrasting stories. I know of Nile Rodgers and a bit of his story, and I think it's a very good example of someone who recognized that the myth they were following was not working and made some really important decisions about where he wanted to be. And I think that was one of the main points you gave in your talk, is around what, that we are being informed. We are informed by our values, by myths, by norms and expectations, and if we're not conscious of them, they're driving us and taking us in a direction we don't actually know where that will be. And really making that really conscious choice. What is the best values to follow that's actually going to give us a life of real meaning? I was struck as well by your desire as a young boy growing up northeast of England for self-transcendence. That really was very curious, because I thought, well, how did you know you wanted to self-transcend? And how you described it was this sense of wanting to be bigger. You knew there was something more, although you wasn't seeing it around you. You wasn't seeing evidence of it. And then, of course, I imagine, what happened was, music came along and they were bigger, larger than life characters. So you thought that must be it. So really, really great storytelling. Really, really enjoyed that. And then really making some important points around, where do we want to arrive at? And the rocking chair test as a test for us to kind of go. In fact, there's a line in a poem that says, if you point your cart north when you want to go south, how will you arrive? And I think that was a key message, I think, of your talk. That's a very old poem, I think, from Raikan, Zen poem. If you point your cart north when you want to go south, how will you arrive? So we have to know where we want to go, and then we have to think, how do we get there? So I really thought you brought those points out really clearly. And really, really in a relevant way to us all. I also like the point you made about if we have the things in our lives that you used to use a phrase of enthralled by, what are we enthralled by? What captures our energy? What captures our attention? All kinds of things, don't they, capture our energy and attention without us even being, again, conscious of it. But one of the points you made was, that actually if we can really be clear about the myth that we're following, the values that we're following, and how we want to be, then other things in our lives, like our jobs or relationships or whatever it is, actually is more satisfying, because we've got a more appropriate way of relating to them. We let go of the unrealistic expectations of them. So I thought that was really important as well. So thank you very much, Akasha Mitra, for some great storytelling and some really pertinent points for us. And now it's over to your questions. So I wonder if any questions have come in whilst I've been relating some of the talk, summarising some of the talk. Britta, any questions that have come in for us?
So we have one question so far, and it's from Mine, who's asking how to be conscious about our values, because in practicality it's quite difficult to become conscious of them.
So if I heard that is about how to be conscious of your values, and how, can we do that in a practical way? How do we do that in a practical way? Is that what so Akasha Mitra, any response to that? How do we be conscious of our values? How did you become conscious of your values?
I think in my own life it was pretty much trial and error, to be honest, which I wouldn't recommend. But I think I could say something about this, but it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, like really what can I get behind and what can I really sincerely say? Like, I feel like I could say something about, there's all sorts of exercises you could do, like actually, looking at what you have in your life and looking at what you've done in your life and I think reflecting is very, very important. I think that's one of the ways that we can become conscious. So, for example, a practice that I've been doing since I was in my teens is actually writing regularly, like journaling, and seeing what themes come up and that sort of thing. I think it's also very important to notice what inspires you. So, you know, that will be different for all of us. But it's a little bit like with what I was saying about my experience when I was in my teens. It's like, okay, well, what is it that inspires me? But not just what inspires me, like what is actually underneath all of that? So what I was looking for was, you know, like I said, a certain kind of energy, a certain kind of excitement, connection with people, some sort of self-transcendence. From a very young age, I had this sense that ordinary human consciousness was not it. You know, there was something else, basically. And then what I found later on in life is that all of those things that I wanted when I was a young man, actually, there was nothing wrong with those. It was just how I was going about sort of following that became problematic, basically. But I also think, and this is what I was sort of trying to get around to before, what I also think is that we often actually don't really know what we want. And maybe this is what you're alluding to, you know, we don't know what we want, and we don't always have the wisdom to know what's the right path for us to follow. So one of the things that I found, you know, since I started following the Buddhist teachings, is that actually is just following in the footsteps of people that are wiser than I am. In a way, then in that process, I've sort of had more of an insight into actually what my values are. I don't know if that's clear, or maybe you could say a bit more about that, Syria Gupta, but it's like, we don't always actually know. It's not possible to say, oh, well, my values are A, B, C, D, and this is what I want to do, and so on. It's almost like actually in the process of, say, for example, doing meditation, being part of a community, being around people that are more experienced than I am, it's then that I see what I respond to. And I've had moments, for example, like being on retreat, where, you know, it's as if suddenly like my heart opens in the presence of something, and it's because of a word, or it's because of a particular atmosphere or something like that. So I think there are things that we can do, you know, like I said, noticing our inspiration, reflecting, and so on. There are things that we can do now to see what our values are. But I also think it's important just to almost like sort of be prepared to provisionally try something out and see if that does or doesn't resonate with how you want to live your life. I don't know if you could say a bit more about that, Syria Gupta.
Yeah, no, I think that was it's a very good answer, and I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? What are our values? Our values, in a way that, as you said, there's exercises you can do. I sometimes lead people in particular exercises, you know, just so we can be conscious of what our values might be and what we want them to be, for example. But, you know, say you've got a value like beauty, there's so many different ways to express that, isn't there? You know, it can go from, you know, really loving wearing loads of makeup and buying shoes to actually living in nature and or actually even, you know, being an artist and, you know, writing poetry or something like that. So just the value itself is a start, is a really important start, and we have to keep kind of going, well, how am I going to express that, and where am I ultimately going with that particular value? What's that value trying to lead me towards? For me, I think impermanence actually and suffering were the two things that made me really get clear about what mattered most. So I think for me, I think what matters most, how do I put that, how do I live that out or connect with that? And then what are the values that support that coming into being? So for me, just knowing that actually I wasn't going to be here forever, and really feeling that, really sort of knowing that in a quite a deeper level, made me make different decisions almost immediately. Knowing that, you know, there is suffering, and I'm not going to necessarily avoid it by accumulating stuff or having certain experiences, knowing that, again made me put certain values, spiritual values, at the center of my life. And then I didn't know how to live them, though. I remember that thinking, right, okay, I sort of know that life is short. I don't want to suffer. I know I'm, need some support around that, some teachings to help me with that. But how does that then express itself in my life? That's where I had to be in community, in a sense. I had to kind of get a sense of how do different people live? How do ethics play out? With what I want to do as well, and how I want to live. So yes, it's not it's not like you decide and then that's it. It is a trial, and it is a bit of a trial and error still. But I think what can help is thinking, okay, what's the most important thing? That if you didn't live out in your life, that your life wouldn't be, meaningful. And for me, that was very simple. Like in the end, that was the love and awareness. And then it's kind of then how do I organize the rest of my life around that was more the kind of something I had to keep trying and try different things.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps.
I think it's almost as well like it's like the lessons are kind of out there, but we can't always see them, or we're not always receptive to them. So I sort of feel about my own life that in a way I was sort of training myself in a certain kind of way. Like when I started practicing Buddhism and I started meditating, then something like you were saying about impermanence, my father died when I was 24. And in a way, then that enabled me to see deeply into the implications of that because I'd been meditating for some time.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like we have to sort of create the receptivity, and then actually the lessons will come along, like, reality will teach us. But we have to be in a space where we're sort of receptive and we're preparing the ground, I think.
Yeah, great. Good. Thank you. Great question. Britta, any more?
Yeah, so it's several actually. The first one is from Alison, who wants to know, who says it's a wonderful story, but now she needs to know how the king of Tibet reacted to being stabbed.
Yes. Great. So how did, Padmasambhava points his finger, a flame shoots out, his clothes are, he's standing there naked, the king's clothes are destroyed. What did the king do next?
Wow. Interesting that you asked that question, because Britta asked the same question. Kiran, who's also in the shrine room, asked the same question. And I'm not going to tell you, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so you can maybe see if that question gets answered in the rest of the week.
We've got tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah. So maybe that question will be answered tomorrow. And if not, I'd invite you to try and find out for yourselves. I think it's interesting to speculate about what might have happened. What do you think? What do you think might have happened? One thing I can tell you, which I didn't say in the story, is that there are all of these people there. There are thousands of the king's sort of courtiers and his retinue and his followers and all of that sort of thing. And there's a lovely, lovely image from the story, which I didn't say, which is that all of them bow down to Padmasambhava, basically. And there's a lovely image, which is, it says that they bow down to him as if taken down by a scythe.
Wow.
So you know what a scythe is? It's like an old-fashioned thing for cutting grass. So it's basically as if they've suddenly all just been brought down, like a notch or two, and they can't help themselves, basically. They bow down to Padmasambhava. And I think that's a lovely, lovely image. It's like, they just recognize that there's something beautiful and incredible there, and they can't help themselves. All of them, every single person that is there just bows down, basically.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to have to wait for exactly what the king said. But what you've just said there, Akasha Mitra, reminded me of the historical Buddha when he's become enlightened. And before he was enlightened, he practiced with his 5 friends who were all ascetics. They were doing these crazy things, really trying to get mind over matter and standing on one leg for hours in the sun and lying on a bed of nails, all that kind of stuff. And he decides it doesn't work. That doesn't work. So he goes off and really discovers enlightenment and comes back to find them afterwards. and they are like, oh, that guy, you know, he went off, he's, you know, useless, that kind of thing. And they decide they're not going to even take any notice of him or look at him, or they turn their backs to him, as it were. But they can almost feel his energy, because his energy is completely transformed. And then when they see him, a bit like the Padmasambhava, they can't help but they know something is radically different about him, and they know that he's, you know, transformed, and he's got a whole different level of presence, and they can't help but bow. It's the same kind of thing. And they kind of make his way, and they get a seat ready for him. They wash his feet, and suddenly they're in a much more receptive attitude. So it really, I can totally imagine that sort of, you know, Padmasambhava appears, already has a strong presence. He then does these feats, and people recognize truth. They recognize wisdom. They recognize a whole different level of consciousness. And it's so rare that I can imagine them completely, you know, bowing towards that. So thanks for telling that bit of the story. We'll have to hear the rest tomorrow night. Britta, another question.
Yeah, so mostly I'm asking or saying actually Padmasambhava seems to have a pretty different approach from the Buddha. Why do you think that is?
So Padmasambhava's got a pretty different approach than the Buddha, than the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. Why do we think that is? So what do we think? Do you want us to have a go, Akasha Mitra? What do you think the main difference is, firstly? And any thoughts as to why?
Yeah, well, I was just saying actually to the tech team before we came back after the tea break. Yeah, he is very, very different, isn't he? So I would urge you to have a look at some images of Padmasambhava. You know, if you just go on Google and put in Padmasambhava, it's hundreds and hundreds of images. He looks very, very different. So he looks kind of fierce. I mean, fierce, but deeply, deeply compassionate at the same time. It's really quite incredible. He has these incredible eyes that just sort of pin you, basically. You know, you can imagine him looking at the king, and the king's there, and he's sort of like looking at him with those eyes, sort of saying, you know, I know what you are, and I'm not going to bow down to you. These incredible eyes, you know, this beautiful long hair. He's holding, the symbol of the Vajra in one hand, and he's holding a skull cap in the other hand. So he's very, very different. Often when we see images of the Buddha, not always, but often, he's kind of sat, he's very serene, he's very peaceful. And the reason why I really love this image of Padmasambhava and, all of these stories is that actually all of that we're talking about. So, what we're talking about is energy, it's transformation, it's completely free of convention, it's completely fearless. All of that is there in the Buddha, actually. It's all there in the enlightened mind, in enlightened consciousness, but it's not always necessarily depicted in the historical Buddha. And the reason why I love these images of Padmasambhava is that it really brings forth that aspect of the quality of enlightenment, or actually even what happens when we practice the Buddha's teachings, even at our level, even at my level, is, what I've experienced is, more energy, opening to mystery, opening to magic. It's a bit dangerous. I find that deeply, deeply, deeply attractive. And it's been my experience as well that actually, if you practice these teachings, definitely something that will come into your life. I really like Padmasambhava because he's not safe in a sense. Like he's not a kind of nice, tidy, like you often see the Buddha, unfortunately, like in gift shops or things like that, like you get pink furry Buddhas and so on. You're not going to see a pink furry Padmasambhava. At least I hope not. It's like that. He's not safe. He's dangerous. It's a bit like the electric current. You can plug into it, but you don't know where it's going to leave you. And I think what that represents really beautifully is that the Dharma and this story is that the Dharma is not just something that we can add on to our lives. If we really want to change, then that involves actually changing. We can't just like the idea of change. Often kind of want to change, but really we don't actually want to do anything about it, or we want to stay the same, but we want the benefits of change. And actually what Padmasambhava represents is something much more kind of elemental than that. You know, he's not safe, and it's that beautiful image of transformation. So yeah, do you want to add something?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I haven't got much more to add. I think the only other thing is that the historical Buddha he was the first to discover enlightenment and be able to detail the path so we can actually practice it. Yeah. So he has a historically deeply significant place, the most important place, if you like, in the whole. Obviously, we wouldn't be here. Padmasambhava wouldn't have arisen without the Buddha. So, but because of that, he has to sort of show perfection in a sense. You know, he's completely a balanced being. Everything is aligned, in balance, and perfect in a sense. And they call him the perfectly enlightened one. And in a way, because he's developed every single quality, every single facet of enlightenment, what's happened through the years is that different teachers, different gurus, masters have then sort of focused on particular aspects of the Buddha and sort of then expressed that. So Padmasambhava, if you like, has focused on particular aspects of the Buddha and expressed that fully. And it means that we can all find within the Buddhist sort of tradition sort of different things that we're attracted to, different things that appeal to our temperaments, our personalities, even our lifestyles as well. You know, so Padmasambhava definitely appeals, well, to many, many people, I would say, you know, but he's very different to other figures. So you might be really attracted to Padmasambhava, but you might not be. There might be other figures that you appeal to you more because of your particular temperament, character, background, or whatever. So that's what I like about the Buddhist tradition. And I remember when I encountered Padmasambhava being really thrilled because I've had a very strong connection with the historical Buddha. Actually, it's almost like my sort of anchor, my reference point is a historical Buddha. But I knew that there were aspects of me that needed transforming, that I didn't know how to transform, that were, you know, I'm very passionate sort of nature. I have lots of dreams. You know, there was lots of aspects of me that didn't sort of fit neatly into boxes. And Padmasambhava speaks to that. He speaks to the depths of our sort of unconscious mind and the parts of us that are, you know, a bit wild, a bit, you know, unruly, and he kind of says those need to be transformed as well, and I'm your person to do that. So we need something like that, even if we're not strongly attracted to Padmasambhava overall. I think we all need that, something that kind of gives us the courage, actually gives us the courage to go into the depths and not be afraid to discover what the strength and the jewels that lie there. Good. Britta, any more?
Yeah, so we have a question from Oliver, and he's asking if, and I think you already touched on it, and anyway, there's a lot in breaking through. Is that something that happens gradually, or can it occur suddenly and radically?
So does, I didn't hear all of that, but what I heard was, can breaking free happen? Breaking through into enlightenment fully, or into truth, just different levels of truth. Can that happen gradually? Does it happen gradually, or can it happen suddenly? Is that the question, Britta?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I think it can. Well, I think actually for most people it happens gradually. You know, in terms of transformation overall, and you know, moving further and further towards enlightenment, towards awareness and love. That's a very gradual process, and within that there are real points of breakthrough, and you know, so in a sense we're working at both those levels. We're working with that kind of recognizing that we're not going to change overnight, probably most of us, And we don't know when the breakthrough, a real deepening of awareness and insight is going to happen. So we're creating the conditions for that. We're creating the conditions to be awake, aware at any time. And the Buddhist sort of tradition is full of stories where people are been, working really hard and thinking, oh, this is never going to happen. I'm never going to become enlightened. And then suddenly they drop a pot on the floor, see all the pieces and go, and there it is, enlightenment dawned. They understand the full depths of impermanence. So there's lots of stories like that. And there's also stories, certainly going back to the Buddha's day, whereby, he would meet somebody in the road and, they'd ask for a teaching, he'd give them a teaching and they were enlightened right then and there. But even in those stories, probably what I would say is that person was pretty evolved, pretty conscious before that happened. They were doing some other kind of work so that when they met the Buddha, the teaching really was the last, thing that they needed to break through. So it happens in both ways. We never know when it's going to happen, so we practice for that, and we recognize it takes time. And some would say this whole lifetime and lifetimes. So we want both perspectives ultimately. The fact that it's, a very gradual process. Change isn't easy, absolutely. And at the same time, we don't know when insight awakening is going to happen. Yeah. Akasha Mitra, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add one thing. I think absolutely, there's not much I can add to that. I think that's true. It's both basically. And that's been my experiences, lots of, I think it's our teacher, Bhante Sangrakshita, didn't he? He said that progress on the spiritual path is measured in inches rather than miles. And that's been my experience. And also I've had big breakthroughs at points as well. One thing I would add as well is that I think it's important. The only way really to sort of do this sustainably is to find joy in the path for its own sake. And actually that's very much the way I try and approach my life. Is that even there's a very, very, very strong faith that enlightenment is possible, but in a sense, bizarrely, even if enlightenment wasn't possible, this is the way that I want to live my life, So there's a paradox there, because you can only really do that if you believe enlightenment's possible. But finding joy, finding satisfaction in the Buddhist path for its own sake as well, that's very much the way I feel, is that, that this is what I want to do. And progress is great and breakthroughs are great when they come. But also just living this life is enjoyable in and of itself as well. Yeah.
That I'm really pleased you said that, because I think it takes us back to one of your key points in the talk as well, around the rocking chair. Looking back, how would we feel about how we've actually lived, and whether we've put our energies in the right place. We might judge where we've got to, but actually what has the experience and the quality of our lives been like? And the thing about the practicing and going more deeply is that you do have a deeper experience of yourself, of other people, of your environment, and it just does have this greater richness. So yes, I've stopped. I used to be quite like, how long is it going to take me to kind of get there? And then it was like, well, gosh, I've got no idea, but I'm just enjoying what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm practicing in a way that's more beneficial to me and those around me. So in that sense, I'm happy with however long it takes me now.
Absolutely.
Good. Got time for what? Maybe not one more. Is that all right, Britta?
Yeah, we have more things also.
Let's do a very quick one.
I'm not sure that how does one open up to the quality of bringing refuge within oneself in this worldly view of impermanence?
So do you want to take that question, Syria Gupta? In this worldly view of impermanence, how does one open up to the quality of going for refuge within oneself?
And
Gosh, that's a big 30-second question.
That's a big 30-second question.
How does it open up? Well, I think there's different ways of doing it. I think meditation helps us open up. I think listening to teachings help us open up. Connecting with others who are practicing helps us open up. All those things, learning about the Buddha and other sort of inspirational teachers, getting a sense of what's possible for us, all helps us open up. And then I think we just have to reflect on our experience. Is it true? Are the teachings true? How do I know it's true? And does it make a difference for me when I meditate and try and follow a teaching than not? Just the teaching of impermanence, such a simple teaching, but it's a very profound one. Even reflecting on that and practicing that and seeing what difference it makes will have an effect and will open us up much more to our values and going for refuge values. So I hope that's a quick one. Akasha Mitra, last word.
Yeah, just very quickly, I completely agree with you. And I also think that's not necessarily an intellectual understanding. We need to find a way of opening up our heart. I mean, it's a lovely lead-in for the short puja we're going to do, because I think often that's when I get a real sense of like the truth of this is when you're opening up to beauty. And, often that happens in the context of ritual or on retreat, or, that's something that we feel in our hearts. It's not necessarily always something that we feel in our heads, which is why beauty and ritual and magic and poetry and storytelling and all of that is so important, I think. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for your questions. Great questions, actually. And thank you very much, Akasha Mitra, for just taking us on a really fabulous journey from the king, Tibet and Padmasambhava, to your hero growing up, to Nile Rodgers, a real kind of journey, and then back to ourselves. And really, ultimately, what most matters, and how do we bring it about? So, I really appreciate the richness of your talk this evening. That was fantastic. And we're going to do a short puja now, a sort of ritual. But before that, I just want to sort of, in a way, Akasha Mitra and I know each other because, from completely different backgrounds, completely different experiences growing up, we've all kind of discovered what matters most to us, and we're trying to live it out, and we're in relationship because of that. We're sort of supporting each other in different ways, and then sharing our practice with you, and we do that freely because it helps us firstly to share it. Kind of we want to share. It's a natural thing for us to share our practice with you, and we also see the effects it has. We see the lives that are transformed, and at the London Buddhist Centre, all kinds of people come along and get involved with us, from school children coming along, learning about different religions, to carers who are really looking for a break, for people working with anxiety or addiction and depression, as well as many people who just want to grow, who just want that sense of self-transcendence that Akasha Mitra was talking about, just want to feel that life has to be more than just getting up in the morning, going to work, coming back, having something to eat, and then going back to bed. It has to be more than that. And so that's what we try and offer. We try and offer a space where people can discover their own values. You can discover your own values, and really importantly, how to live with them, how to actually make them real. So it has a positive effect on you and people in your life and the people around you in the world. So we're just inviting you to help us do that. In a way, you helping us do that helps us help you as well, and help many people who we've not yet managed to share our message with because of resources and things. So we're inviting you to give maybe £10, or set up a standing order, even better, that will help us really continue what we're doing, really reach out to you, put on these free courses. So anyone, so that this is not a barrier to anybody. We don't want the Dharma, the teachings to be, and money to be a barrier to anyone. So really, you helping us helps us do that. So there was a link in the chat, and really appreciate your gifts. And thank you for all those people, all of you who are already giving, really deeply appreciated. And it's a way for you to know you're contributing and making a difference in the world. So I hope you're feeling the benefits of doing that as well. So, okay, we're going to do a short ritual now. It's a threefold puja. And really, it's a way, in a way, the puja expresses values, spiritual values. And the puja enables us to, whatever we're feeling, however our day's been, really just orientate ourselves around these core values and express that, and with our body, with our voice. So we'll be doing that now. I'll lead us in, and Akasha Mitra will respond. And do feel free to join in with the response. It's just call and response. I'll call Akasha Mitra at home. You can be responding, and we'll do that. And at the end, I'll invite Akasha Mitra to do a mantra. So he'll do a mantra at the end, and maybe make some offerings, and then we'll conclude the evening there. Okay, so settling in. Just arriving back into your body and seat. Letting words just recede to the background. Connecting in with how you are at this moment in time. The Threefold Puja. Opening reverence. We reverence the Buddha.
We reverence the Buddha,
The perfectly enlightened one.
the perfectly enlightened one,
The shower of the way.
the shower of the way.
We reverence the Dharma.
We reverence the Dharma,
The teaching of the Buddha,
the teaching of the Buddha,
which leads from darkness to light.
which leads from darkness to light.
We reverence the Sangha,
We reverence the Sangha,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
that inspires and guides.
that inspires and guides.
Reverence to the three jewels. We reverence the Buddha
We reverence the Buddha
and aspire to follow him.
and aspire to follow him.
The Buddha was born as we are born.
The Buddha was born as we are born.
What the Buddha overcame, we too can overcome.
What the Buddha overcame, we too can overcome.
What the Buddha attained, we too can attain.
What the Buddha attained, we too can attain.
We reverence the Dharma and aspire to follow it.
We reverence the Dharma and aspire to follow it.
With body, speech and mind until the end.
With body, speech and mind until the end.
The truth in all its aspects.
The truth in all its aspects.
The path in all its stages.
A path in all its stages.
We aspire to study.
We aspire to study,
Practice.
practice,
Realize.
realize.
We reverence the Sangha and aspire to follow it.
We reverence the Sangha and aspire to follow it.
The fellowship of those who tread the way.
The fellowship of those who tread the way.
As one by one we make our own commitments.
As one by one we make our own commitments.
An ever widening circle, the Sangha grows.
An ever widening circle, the Sangha grows.
Offering to the Buddha. Reverencing the Buddha, we offer flowers.
Reverencing the Buddha, we offer flowers.
Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming.
Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming.
Flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen.
Flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen.
Our bodies too,
Our bodies too,
like flowers,
like flowers,
will pass away.
pass away.
Reverencing the Buddha, we offer candles.
Reverencing the Buddha, we offer candles.
To him who is the light, we offer light.
To him who is the light, we offer light.
From his greater lamp, a lesser lamp we light within us.
From his greater lamp, a lesser lamp we light within us.
The lamp of Bodhi shining within our hearts.
The lamp of Bodhi shining within our hearts.
Reverencing the Buddha, we offer incense.
Reverencing the Buddha, we offer incense.
Incense whose fragrance pervades the air.
Incense whose fragrance pervades the air.
The fragrance of the perfect life.
Fragrance of the perfect life.
Sweeter than incense.
Sweeter than incense.
Spreads in all directions.
Spreads in all directions.
Throughout the world.
Throughout the world. Om Ahom Vajraguru Padma Siddhi Hom. 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 Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to have you with us this evening. And thanks very much to Syria Gupta, and thanks for the tech team this evening. And yeah, wish you all well and see you again soon.